Even the brothel rejected her, but a sheriff took her hand and said, "I will buy her." The auctioneer laughed. The cold wind cut through the streets of the town like sharp knives, making everyone hurry along, their heads down, wishing to be anywhere but outside. Amid the hurried steps and busy chatter, one figure moved slowly, almost invisibly. She was a young woman, barely 17, yet her eyes carried a weight that no child should ever bear. Her clothes were torn and worn, patched so many times that the fabric hung unevenly, barely shielding her from the biting chill. Her hair was tangled and dull, and her bare feet were sore and blistered from walking miles on the rough cobblestones. She walked with her head slightly bowed, trying not to be noticed. But somehow, in a town where people looked away from those in need, she still felt every gaze as a judgment. Life had never been kind to her. Orphaned at a young age, she had learned that survival was the only skill that mattered. There had been brief moments of warmth, a neighbor's smile, a kind word from a passing stranger. But they had been fleeting, like sunlight in winter, and she had grown used to disappointment. Hunger was her constant companion. Some nights she had nothing to eat, and her stomach ached in a way that made it hard to sleep. She had begged, worked small jobs, done chores for coins, anything to keep going. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, it seemed the world had closed its doors to her. Today was different. Today she had been dragged into a place she had never imagined. She had been taken to the auction, a place where people like her were sold to strangers. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the building. The room was large, filled with people, and the noise was overwhelming. The auctioneer's voice boomed over the crowd, calling out names and prices as though the people in front of him were objects rather than living, breathing human beings. Her stomach turned, and her hands trembled as she realized that she was the next in line. The brothel owner looked at her with a critical eye, scanning her from head to toe. He had seen many young women, some desperate, some cunning, but when his gaze met hers, he shook his head in disappointment. She had expected rejection. After all, she had been turned away before, but the words still cut deeper than she thought possible. "Too broken," he muttered, almost to himself, before stepping aside. Even the place that took in the unwanted and the lost refused her. Her chest tightened, and tears threatened to spill over. She felt invisible, unwanted, and more alone than ever. The crowd around her did not pause. Some whispered, some laughed, and some looked away, pretending not to notice the young woman standing there, trembling. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, judging, mocking, and dismissing. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to escape the humiliation that seemed unbearable. Her throat tightened as she tried to hold back a sob. She had no one to turn to, no friend, no family, no protector. She was completely at the mercy of a world that had been cruel from the very beginning. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped forward. The sheriff! Whoa! His presence was commanding, yet there was something different in his gaze. He looked at her not with judgment, not with hunger or greed, but with curiosity and concern. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her as a human being, as someone who mattered, and it shook her. Her legs wobbled, her hands still shaking, as she tried to comprehend what this meant. "Bring her here," the sheriff said, his voice firm but not cruel. The auctioneer laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed through the room. "She's nothing! Even the brothel rejected her! You'll waste your money!" The crowd joined in the laughter, their voices harsh and unkind. But the sheriff's expression did not change. He held out his hand toward her. For a moment, she froze. Could she trust this man? Could she believe that someone could actually care for her? She had been hurt so many times that her heart had built walls too high even for kindness to reach. Her mind raced as she hesitated. She had been taught that no one helped for free, that every act of kindness had a hidden cost. She glanced at the sheriff, his eyes steady, unwavering. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she stepped toward him. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the wooden floor, but each step felt like crossing a vast chasm. The auctioneer snorted, clearly expecting her to refuse, to resist. But she moved forward, because what choice did she really have? Staying behind meant returning to the cold, to hunger, to nothing. When her hand finally touched the sheriff's, she was startled at how gentle he was. He did not grip her tightly or pull her roughly. Instead, he took her hand as though he were offering protection, as though he were telling her, silently, that she was not alone. The crowd murmured, some shocked, some still laughing, but she could not hear them anymore. Her entire world had narrowed down to this moment, to this touch, to this first hint of hope. As the sheriff guided her away from the auction block, her heart pounded not only from fear but from something she had not felt in a long time: relief. She kept her head low, afraid that if she looked up, the fragile hope she felt would shatter. The sounds of the auction faded behind her, replaced by the distant calls of townspeople and the rustling of the wind outside. She wondered where he was taking her, and if she would ever truly be safe. The sheriff did not speak much, only enough to reassure her. "You're safe now," he said, and though his voice was steady, it carried warmth. For the first time she imagined a life beyond the auction, a life where she could breathe without fear, where she might even be able to laugh again. She clung to that thought, fragile as it was, because it was the first light she had seen in years. Outside, the wind still bit at her skin, but she felt stronger walking beside him. The streets no longer seemed completely hostile. There were still dangers, still hardships, but she had someone who would not abandon her, someone willing to see her as a person, not a thing. For the first time, the idea of tomorrow did not make her stomach twist in fear. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for something better. As they reached the outskirts of town, she dared to glance up at the sheriff. His eyes met hers, and she saw no mockery, no judgment, only quiet determination. He would not let her be lost. And in that moment, something deep within her shifted. The weight of hopelessness did not vanish entirely, but it lightened just enough to give her the courage to step forward. For the first time in her life, she believed that someone could care, that she might have a future, and that even in a world so cruel, kindness could exist. Bask. The auctioneer's laughter faded into the distance, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat and the steady steps of the sheriff beside her. She still felt fear, yes, but it was now tempered with a fragile yet real hope. And as the two of them walked together, leaving the noise and cruelty behind, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she could survive. Perhaps she could even thrive. The first step had been taken. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she did not walk it alone. Suspense, and that, she thought, might just be enough. The young woman's footsteps were slow and cautious as they followed the sheriff through the winding streets, away from the noise of the town. Every shadow seemed longer, every sound sharper, as though the world were reminding her that danger could be around any corner. But the sheriff walked steadily, never rushing, never faltering. His presence gave her a strange sense of calm, even though fear still lingered like a cold fog in her chest. She had never trusted anyone in her life. Yet here was a man who had stepped forward when everyone else had turned away. That alone made her wonder if perhaps the world was not entirely cruel. They walked in silence for a while. The sheriff glanced at her occasionally, but he did not ask questions right away. He seemed to understand that she needed time to adjust, time to feel safe. Every now and then she would catch her reflection in a shop window, and she barely recognized herself. Her clothes were dirty and ragged, her hair a tangle of knots, her face pale and haggard, and yet there was something in her eyes, a spark of life, of determination, that the sheriff seemed to notice. Finally, they reached a small inn on the outskirts of the town. The building was modest, but it had sturdy walls, a warm hearth, and a quiet sense of safety that made her stomach relax slightly. Bay. The sheriff opened the door for her and gestured for her to enter first. She hesitated, glancing back toward the streets she had just left, where the auction and the mocking crowd still lingered in her memory. Then, slowly, she stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the fire wash over her like a gentle hand. "This will be your place for now," the sheriff said. His voice was calm, but there was authority in it that made her feel that no one would dare harm her here. "You are safe."
Safe.
The word felt foreign to her ears. She had spent so many years running, hiding, begging, and fearing that the idea of safety seemed almost impossible. She wanted to believe him, she really did. But part of her braced for disappointment, as if the very air were waiting to betray her. The sheriff guided her to a small room at the back of the inn. It was simple, with a clean bed, a wooden table, and a small window that let in the light of the afternoon sun. She had not seen sunlight in a long time without feeling it as a reminder of her hardships. Here, it felt different, soft, warm, promising. She sat on the edge of the bed, unsure of what to do with her trembling hands.
"You must be hungry," the sheriff said gently.
"Sit down. I will bring you something to eat." The food he brought was plain, but it smelled rich and warm. She hesitated at first, afraid to eat too much or too quickly, as though the kindness might vanish if she took it. But hunger won over fear. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling something she had not felt in a long time: relief. The warmth spread through her body, and for the first time that day, she felt her shoulders unclench. While she ate, the sheriff watched her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with careful attention, as though he were trying to understand her without rushing her. He did not ask her name yet or her story, because he sensed that forcing her to speak would only make her shut down. Instead, he waited, giving her the time to feel safe enough to breathe, to process, to exist without fear. After she finished, she felt awkward. Words seemed heavy and meaningless, yet the need to speak tugged at her. She finally whispered, almost to herself. I never thought anyone would help me." The sheriff nodded slowly, as if he understood every word without needing her to explain further. "I know," he said softly. "And that is why I am here. You are not alone anymore." Those words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. She had never experienced kindness like this. She had never known that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, but years of abandonment had taught her that hope was dangerous. The days that followed were a delicate dance of trust. The sheriff allowed her to rest, to eat, and to recover from the exhaustion that had become a part of her life. Slowly, she began to learn that life could be different. She watched the world outside the window, noticing the small joys she had forgotten. The way sunlight sparkled on the rooftops, the sound of birds in the trees, the laughter of children playing in the distance. For a moment, she let herself imagine a life beyond survival, a life where she could feel safe and valued. The sheriff, noticing her curiosity, began teaching her small skills. He showed her how to mend clothes, how to keep the small room tidy, how to manage coins and simple chores. Each skill was small, but each one carried a sense of empowerment she had never known. She began to feel that she could manage life in some small way, that she could take control of at least a few things in a world that had always seemed uncontrollable.
Even as she learned, the memories of the auction haunted her.
At night, when the inn was quiet, she would see the sneering faces, hear the mocking laughter, feel the shame of rejection pressing down on her chest. Sometimes tears would slip quietly from her eyes, and she would whisper to herself, "I am nothing. I am worthless." But each morning the sheriff's calm presence reminded her that she was more than those voices, more than the cruel world she had endured. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he spoke again. "Des, you are stronger than you think," he said, his eyes steady on hers. "What happened to you was not your fault, and it does not define who you are."
She looked at him, surprised at how firmly he spoke, and for the first time she felt a spark of hope.
Perhaps, just perhaps, her past did not have to control her future. Perhaps she could find a way to be more than what the world had forced her to be. The sheriff did not push her to talk about her past, but slowly, over time, she began to share fragments of her story. She spoke of the streets, of nights spent hungry, of the loneliness that had been her constant companion. She spoke of the moments of kindness that had been fleeting, of the fear that had never left her. And the sheriff listened without interruption, without judgment, offering only quiet support. Through these small exchanges, trust began to grow. She realized that he did not see her as a victim or as someone to pity. He saw her as a person, as someone with strength she herself had not yet recognized. And slowly, she began to see herself in the same way. Days turned into weeks. Each day brought new challenges and new victories. She learned to prepare simple meals, to clean and care for herself, to face small fears and overcome them. The sheriff continued to guide her, always patient, always steady. And with each passing day, the heavy weight of shame and fear lifted slightly, replaced by something unfamiliar but welcome: confidence. The townspeople began to notice her presence at the inn, though she remained cautious, wary of their judgment. Some were kind, offering smiles or simple greetings. Others whispered their words sharp and cruel, questioning why the sheriff had taken in someone from such a terrible past.
But she learned to hold her head high, to remember the sheriff's words and the small victories she had earned for herself.
One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in warm shades of gold and orange, she stood by the window and watched the town below.
The wind carried the faint sound of laughter and life, a reminder that the world was not entirely dark. She felt the warmth of the room, the safety of the walls around her, and the steady presence of the sheriff nearby. For the first time, she imagined a future where she could walk without fear, where she could make choices for herself, and where she might even feel joy again. It was not a perfect life. There were still fears, still memories that cut deep, still moments of doubt and hesitation. But for the first time, she felt something she had not felt in years: possibility. The world had been cruel, yes, but it was not entirely hopeless. And perhaps, with patience, courage, and guidance, she could find her place within it. The sheriff stood beside her, silent, offering only the quiet reassurance of his presence. And in that moment, she understood something vital. She was no longer alone. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges she could not yet imagine. But she had taken the first step toward a new life, and that step had already changed everything. The auction, the mocking crowd, the cold and hunger, they were no longer the center of her world. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense that her life could matter. And though the future was uncertain, she dared to hope that she might finally find the strength to face it, not as a victim, but as someone capable of survival, resilience, and perhaps even happiness.
The days after the auction felt different from any she had ever known.
The young woman woke each morning to the warmth of a safe room, to the smell of breakfast being prepared, and to the quiet presence of the sheriff nearby. These small routines were strange and unfamiliar, yet comforting in a way she had never imagined. For years, her life had been chaos, running from hunger, from cruelty, from people who cared nothing for her existence. Now there was a rhythm, a structure, and with it a glimmer of stability. The sheriff, patient as ever, did not push her too quickly into the ways of the world. Instead, he encouraged small steps, washing her clothes properly, preparing simple meals, tending to the garden outside the inn. Each task, though ordinary, carried a weight of independence she had never known. She began to notice that completing them gave her a quiet pride, a sense that she could manage more than she had thought possible. For the first time, she felt a hint of control over her life. One afternoon, as the sunlight spilled through the window, the sheriff suggested she learn to read more carefully. "Words give you power," he said, placing a worn book on the table.
Patience.
They let you understand the world and make choices for yourself. Reading had always been a luxury she could not afford. Books had seemed like treasures too far away.
But curiosity won over fear. She opened the book slowly, tracing the letters with her finger as the sheriff guided her. At first it was slow, painstaking, and frustrating. Words twisted and tumbled before her eyes, refusing to make sense. But the sheriff's calm voice reminded her not to give up. "Take your time," he said.
You are learning, and that is enough. Day by day, her confidence grew. She began reading simple sentences without stumbling.
She memorized words she had never known and discovered the thrill of understanding something new.
Each small victory, though minor to an outsider, felt like a triumph to her.
For the first time, she imagined a life beyond mere survival, a life where she could think, learn, and dream. But rebuilding her life was not without its challenges. Memories of the auction haunted her still. At night, when the inn was silent, she would see the sneering faces of the crowd and hear the laughter that had echoed in the cold hall. The fear and shame were so strong that tears would come unbidden, soaking her pillow. She would whisper to herself,
I am not worth anything.
"I am nothing." The sheriff noticed her struggles, though he never forced her to speak. He offered gentle reminders of her strength. "Those people don't define you," he said one evening as she sat quietly staring into the fire. "They saw only what they wanted to see, but I see you. And you are more than they can ever understand." His words sank slowly into her mind. It was difficult to believe at first, but gradually she began to internalize them. She started to see that her past, terrible as it was, did not have to control her future. The shame she had carried for so long began to loosen its grip, replaced by a cautious hope. One day, the sheriff suggested she try her hand at helping with the inn itself. "It's not just chores," he explained. "It's about learning responsibility, about showing yourself that you can manage things that matter." Her first tasks were small: sweeping floors, arranging supplies, cleaning dishes. But they brought unexpected satisfaction. With each completed task, she began to feel a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her life for so long. The sheriff praised her efforts, not with grand gestures, but with quiet encouragement. "Well done."
You did that well.
Even as she built these small skills, the young woman remained cautious. Trusting someone had been painful before. It had often led to betrayal.
Yet the sheriff's consistent support and gentle patience were slowly teaching her that not everyone would hurt her. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax in the presence of another person, to feel safety without bracing for disaster. One morning, as she worked in the garden outside, she noticed a group of children playing nearby. Their laughter was bright, carefree, and she felt a pang of longing. He had never known such freedom, had never experienced the simplicity of childhood joy. Watching them, she felt something stir inside, a desire not only to survive, but to live fully. Desperate, she wanted to experience happiness, not just endure life. The sheriff noticed her thoughtful expression and asked gently, "Do you wish you could join them?" She nodded slightly, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. I don't know if I could," she admitted. "I've never played or laughed like that. I've only survived. It's never too late to learn. Those words stayed with her. Over the following weeks, she began taking small steps toward participation. She practiced speaking with the children, joining in games cautiously at first, then more confidently. She discovered joy in movement, laughter, and interaction, small pleasures she had thought were forever beyond her reach. Best. As her skills and confidence grew, so did her understanding of herself. She began to see that the person she had been, hungry, scared, rejected, was not all she would ever be.
And desperation. And the couple of these men.
Each day she added small victories to her growing sense of identity, cooking a meal without help, reading an entire page of a book, completing her chores efficiently, or sharing a laugh with the children.
These accomplishments, though modest, strengthened her spirit. Yet life outside the inn was not without its challenges. Rumors about her past began to circulate in the town. Whispers followed her when she stepped into the marketplace, and some people looked at her with judgmental eyes. She felt the old fear rise in her chest, a reminder that the world was still harsh and cruel. For a moment she wanted to retreat, to hide where no one could see her, but she remembered the sheriff's words. You are more than they can see. You are stronger than their whispers. With that thought, she faced the townspeople with quiet dignity. She did not speak of her past unless asked, and even then she held her head high. Slowly, some began to see her differently, not as a girl with a broken past, but as a young woman learning to stand on her own. Respect was earned slowly, but it began to grow like tiny buds in a long winter. One day a man from the marketplace, curious about her quiet determination, approached the inn. I've heard about you, he said cautiously. I see you working, learning. You are not like people say. She looked at him surprised. No one had ever said such words to her before. A quiet smile touched her lips. I am learning, she said simply. Good, he replied. Keep it up. Big. The town will notice soon enough. Her heart lifted. For the first time, she realized that people could change their opinions, that reputation was not fixed, and that she could shape how others saw her through her actions. Brian. She did not need to be defined by the cruelty of the past. She could define herself through her own choices. The sheriff, seeing her small victories, offered his quiet approval. He never boasted about her progress to others, but he allowed her to see his pride through small gestures. A nod, a warm smile, or a gentle word of encouragement. These moments became anchors for her, reminders that she could trust in her own growth and in the possibility of kindness from others. As the days continued, she began to imagine a life beyond the inn. She dreamed of learning more, of exploring the town, of helping others who were in need as she once had been. The fear that had once dominated her thoughts was still present, but it had become a distant shadow, one she could face and overcome rather than run from. Evenings were still quiet, reflective moments by the fire where she thought about how far she had come. She had gone from a girl trembling on an auction block, rejected and alone, to someone who could cook, clean, read, and even laugh. She was learning that life could be more than survival, that it could be full of learning, hope, and small joys. And through it all, the sheriff remained a steady presence. He did not demand gratitude or obedience. He only offered patience, guidance, and the quiet assurance that she was never alone. The first time she began to feel that safety, stability, and hope were not just fleeting ideas, but achievable realities. As she lay in bed each night, listening to the quiet creak of the inn, she allowed herself a thought she had never dared before. I am alive. and I am capable. I can face tomorrow. And in that thought, fragile as it was, there was a strength she had never known, a strength that would carry her forward into the challenges and triumphs yet to come. Life had begun to take on a rhythm, but the young woman knew it was only the beginning of her journey. The small victories she had earned, the ability to read, to cook, to laugh with the children, to face the judgment of townspeople, had given her confidence that they had not erased the reality of the world outside the inn. She was learning that the path to independence and respect was rarely smooth. Challenges waited around every corner, and she would need courage, patience, and resilience to face them. One morning, as the sun rose over the town, the sheriff suggested she accompany him into the marketplace. "It's time for you to see the world beyond the inn," he said. "You've grown stronger. You need to understand that you can face life out there, too." Her stomach tightened at the thought. The marketplace was loud, bustling, full of people who whispered and judged. Memories of the auction, of the mocking faces, of the harsh laughter, rose unbidden. Perversion. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready, but the sheriff's steady gaze reassured her. "You can do this," he said. "I'll be right here." Step by step, she followed him. The marketplace smelled of bread, herbs, and leather, and the hum of conversation surrounded her. She felt exposed, as if everyone could see the doubts in her heart, but she focused on the sheriff's presence beside her, letting his quiet confidence guide her.
At first, people stared. Some whispered, some laughed, and some even pointed.
She felt the familiar sting of shame and fear, but she held her head high. The sheriff had taught her that her worth was not determined by their opinions, and she clung to that lesson. Slowly, she began to notice the details of the market. The colorful fruits stacked neatly, the baskets of fresh flowers, the warmth of sunlight glinting off polished goods. For the first time, she allowed herself to see life as something more than danger and rejection.
A merchant called out, offering apples for sale. She hesitated, unsure if she was allowed to interact.
But the sheriff encouraged her gently. "Ask how much," he said. Trembling, she asked, "How much for 3 apples?" The merchant, surprised by her polite tone and steady gaze, smiled. 3 coins, he replied. She handed over the coins carefully, counting them as she had learned. When the merchant thanked her, she felt a small thrill of pride. For the first time, she had participated in a simple transaction, not as someone forced into it, but as someone choosing to act. She realized that this was a step toward independence, and it made her chest swell with quiet satisfaction. As they walked further, a group of townspeople approached, their expressions mixed with curiosity and suspicion.
I hear she was at the auction,
one whispered loudly. "Everything that brother didn't want her." The words stung, but she remembered the sheriff's lessons. She did not retreat. Instead, she squared her shoulders and spoke firmly, yet calmly. "I am not the girl you think I am. I am learning, and I will make my own life." The sheriff's hand brushed hers in support, and she felt a surge of strength. The whispers faded as the townspeople saw her confidence, her determination. But others watched silently, perhaps realizing that she was no longer the frightened girl they had expected. Later, back at the inn, she reflected on the experience. The marketplace had tested her courage, and she had passed. The sense of achievement was exhilarating, yet she knew there would be more challenges ahead. Life outside the inn would not always be gentle or kind, and she would need to continue building her skills and confidence to navigate it. The sheriff noticed her thoughtful expression and asked, "How do you feel about today?" She paused. "Scared," she admitted, "but, stronger." "I didn't run." He nodded, a proud, quiet smile on his face. "That is the first step," he said. You faced fear and walked through it. Each day will bring new challenges, but you are learning to face them. The young woman continued her lessons, learning not just practical skills, but also how to read people, understand situations, and make decisions for herself. She discovered that she had a keen mind, able to notice small details others overlooked. She could sense danger before it arrived and could predict the behavior of those around her. These abilities, combined with her growing confidence, made her more resilient than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, as she practiced her reading by the fire, a letter arrived from someone in town. It was from a woman who had heard of her progress and wanted guidance for her own troubled niece. The young woman hesitated before opening it, unsure if she was ready to offer advice. But as she read the letter, she realized that her experiences, painful as they had been, had given her insight and wisdom. She could now help others avoid some of the hardships she had endured. This realization brought a sense of purpose. She was no longer just surviving. She could contribute, teach, and influence. She began to imagine a life where she was not merely a victim of circumstance, but someone capable of shaping her own destiny and helping others along the way. However, challenges continued to arise. Not everyone in town was supportive. Some merchants doubted her abilities, some neighbors whispered cruelly, and a few former acquaintances seemed intent on testing her patience and resolve. Each encounter was a reminder that the world would not change simply because she had changed. She would need to be patient, assertive, and strategic in navigating these interactions. One day, a man who had once mocked her at the marketplace approached the inn, clearly curious and slightly hostile.
"So, the girl from the auction thinks she can live differently?" he asked, smirking.
The young woman took a deep breath, recalling everything she had learned. She stood tall, her voice steady. "I am not the same person you saw before. I am learning, and I will continue to grow. You may doubt me, but I will prove myself through my actions, not through words." The man paused, clearly taken aback by her confidence. After a moment, he nodded slightly and walked away. The encounter was small, but it marked a significant victory. She realized that standing firm, speaking with dignity, and showing consistent effort could change how others perceived her. Evenings at the inn became times of reflection and growth. She would sit by the fire, reviewing the day's events, considering what she had learned, and planning small improvements for tomorrow.
The sheriff never intruded on these moments, only offering gentle encouragement and guidance when asked.
She began to understand the value of patience, observation, and self-discipline, qualities that would help her face life's challenges more effectively.
In the quiet moments, she also began to explore her own emotions more deeply. She felt joy in small victories, pride in accomplishments, and even a quiet curiosity about the future. She had never allowed herself to feel hopefully, fearing disappointment and betrayal. But now she realized that hope was not dangerous. It was necessary. It fueled courage, resilience, and the desire to continue growing. As the days and weeks passed, she noticed subtle changes within herself. Posture was more upright, her voice more confident, and her eyes brighter. She no longer flinched at every loud noise or suspicious glance. She had developed an inner strength that came from experience, learning, and the steady guidance of someone who truly cared for her well-being. And yet she remained aware of the past that had shaped her. The memory of the auction, of being rejected and humiliated, still lingered in the corners of her mind. But instead of allowing it to dominate her thoughts, she used it as a reminder of how far she had come. Each challenge she faced now was an opportunity to prove to herself that she was more than her past, that she could overcome, adapt, and thrive. By the end of Part 4, she had grown from a frightened, hopeless girl into a young woman who was beginning to understand the value of resilience, courage, and dignity. The town, though still full of judgment and whispers, had begun to recognize her efforts and her growth. Beth. She was no longer defined by the cruelty and rejection she had experienced, but by her actions, determination, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. For the first time, she could imagine a future not dominated by fear, hunger, or humiliation, but by learning, growth, and the possibility of genuine connection. The sheriff's guidance, combined with her own determination, had brought her to a point where she could face challenges head-on, and even begin to shape her destiny with confidence and hope. The young woman had come a long way from the frightened, trembling girl who had stood on the auction block. Life had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, and yet she had survived. More than that, she had grown stronger, wiser, and braver. Each day had brought new lessons, small victories, and challenges that she had faced with courage. Now, as she looked out over the town from the small inn where she had found safety, she could feel a quiet pride in what she had accomplished. She was no longer defined by her past. She was shaping her own future. The sheriff had been a steady presence throughout her journey. He had not treated her as weak or broken. Patience and trust, and in doing so he had helped her discover the strength she had within herself. But she had learned that she did not need to rely entirely on another person. She had skills, knowledge, and resilience of her own. She was capable of making decisions, solving problems, and standing tall even when others doubted her. One morning she stepped outside the inn into the crisp sunlight, feeling the warmth on her face and the gentle breeze against her skin. Today she would face a challenge unlike any she had before. The sheriff had asked her to represent the inn in a meeting with several townspeople. It was a chance to demonstrate not only her abilities, but also her dignity, confidence, and independence. Her stomach fluttered with nerves, but she took a deep breath, recalling all the lessons she had learned: courage, patience, and self-respect. She had carried them this far, and she would carry them now. As she entered the meeting room, the townspeople glanced at her with curiosity. Some remembered the whispers about her past, but now they saw a young woman who carried herself with calm confidence. She greeted them politely, her voice steady. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," she said. "I am here to show that I am capable and responsible, and that my past does not define me." The meeting proceeded, and she presented her ideas for improving the inn, managing resources, and assisting travelers. She spoke with clarity and focus, answering questions with thoughtfulness, and demonstrating skills she had acquired over the months.
Some townspeople were impressed, others skeptical, but all were forced to recognize her competence.
When the meeting ended, a few of them nodded in respect. For the first time, she realized that people could see her for who she truly was, not for what she had endured. Walking back to the inn afterward, she felt a sense of exhilaration. Each step reminded her that she was capable of facing the world on her own terms. She had earned respect through her actions, not through words or pleading. And more than that, she had earned respect for herself. She could finally look in the mirror and recognize the young woman she had become. Strong, capable, resilient, and determined. In the days that followed, she continued to grow. She took on more responsibilities at the inn, managing supplies, helping guests, and even teaching younger children basic reading and arithmetic. Each task reinforced her sense of independence and self-worth. She discovered joy in small accomplishments, in seeing others benefit from her efforts, and in the quiet satisfaction of a job done well. The townspeople, who had once whispered and judged, began to treat her differently. They noticed her dedication, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. Slowly, the skepticism that had lingered in their eyes transformed into admiration. Some approached her for advice, some asked her to assist with their businesses, and a few even offered their friendship. These connections, once unimaginable, became a testament to how much she had grown and how far she had come. Despite her progress, the memories of her past never fully disappeared. Occasionally, she would think back to the auction, the mocking laughter, and the rejection she had faced. At first, these memories had brought shame and fear, but now they served as reminders of how much she had endured and overcome.
Each memory was no longer a weight, but a mark of her resilience.
They reminded her that she could survive even the cruelest circumstances and emerge stronger on the other side. One afternoon, as she was teaching a young girl to read, she realized how far she had come. She saw in the child's eager eyes a reflection of herself months ago, curious, scared, and uncertain. But now she could offer guidance, encouragement, and support. She could be the person she had needed, the one who offered hope and kindness. The realization filled her with quiet joy. Her past, though painful, had given her the wisdom to help others. She understood that her experiences were not wasted. They had shaped her into someone capable of making a difference. The sheriff, observing her growth, smiled quietly. He had known from the beginning that she possessed a remarkable strength, and it had only grown with time. Yet he never took credit for her progress. He understood that she had earned it herself through perseverance, courage, and the steady application of the lessons she had learned. He remained a mentor and friend, but he also allowed her the space to claim her own achievements. As months passed, the young woman began to plan for her future. She dreamed of expanding her skills, learning more about the world, and perhaps even traveling to distant towns to gain new experiences. She no longer feared the unknown. Instead, she saw it as a landscape of opportunities. Her confidence had grown to the point where challenges that would once have terrified her now inspired determination and excitement. One day, the sheriff presented her with a small, carefully wrapped package. Shh! Inside was a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts, your dreams, and your plans," he said. "You've come a long way, and there is still so much ahead. Write your story, so you will always remember how far you've come." Don't. She held the journal in her hands, feeling its weight and significance. It was more than paper and leather. It was a symbol of her journey, her resilience, and her independence. She smiled, a smile that reflected pride, hope, and determination. She would write her story not just for herself, but to remind others that even in the darkest beginnings, strength, courage, and kindness could shape a brighter future. As she wrote, she reflected on the people who had helped her, the lessons she had learned, and the challenges she had overcome. She realized that every small step, the careful counting of coins, the reading of a single sentence, the act of standing tall before judgmental eyes, had brought her here. Each victory, no matter how minor it seemed at the time, had built the foundation for the confident, resilient young woman she had become. Evenings became a time of reflection and gratitude. She would sit by the fire, journal in hand, and think about the past, present, and future. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. The fear that had once dominated her every thought had been replaced by determination, and the despair that had once crushed her spirit had been transformed into hope. The town, once skeptical, had begun to recognize her as a person of strength and character. She had earned the respect of her neighbors, the admiration of those who once doubted her, and the quiet trust of the sheriff, who had never treated her as anything less than capable.
These relationships, built on mutual respect and understanding, were a testament to the power of perseverance, kindness, and courage. One morning, she stepped outside the inn to find the marketplace bustling as usual.
Merchants called out their wares, children laughed and played, and townspeople moved through their daily routines. She felt a sense of belonging, a feeling she had never thought possible, built up in his lungs. He glances around in desk. She belonged not because she had been given a place, but because she had earned it. She had faced fear, endured hardship, and proven her strength. The sheriff approached her, his expression calm but proud. "You've done well," he said simply.
She looked at him and smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied softly.
"You did it yourself," he said. "I only guided you."
All the courage, strength, and determination came from within you. In that moment, she realized the truth of his words. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been hers to travel.
She had faced despair, rejection, and fear, and she had emerged stronger. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to act with courage. She had transformed from a frightened girl into a young woman capable of shaping her own destiny. As she walked through the marketplace, she felt the weight of her past lifting. I carried the lessons, the resilience, and the hope she had gained, but she was no longer defined by fear or rejection. The future stretched before her, full of possibilities, challenges, and opportunities. She could choose her path, embrace her dreams, and continue to grow into the person she had always hoped to become. And so the girl who had once been rejected, abandoned, and humiliated took her place in the world with quiet dignity and unwavering strength. She had been through darkness, but she had emerged into the light, ready to face whatever came next. The journey was not over, but she was prepared. She was alive, capable, and free. For the first time, she looked at herself and smiled, knowing that she had finally found her place, not as a victim of the past, but as the architect of her own future.